Okay, great. Thank you, Ben. And let's start with a roll call.
We got to get rid of that. Got it. Art.
Oh, yeah, I got that.
You got
so
that.
Lawson Wilson is here as vice chair, stepping in for Brett, who's out.
Jessica Bass is here as secretary. I'll be taking notes.
Jane Ashworth is here as a member.
Even Darren, Mark Good, Larry Albee.
I'm a member of the public, Sarah White.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome. Thanks for coming. Minutes were taken last month.
Yes, and given to Brett and Jesse.
And we haven't
seen them.
I
haven't seen them either.
Then we will not approve them tonight. We'll try to distribute tonight's and last month's in preparation for next. And so then that brings us to regular business, and I'll hand it over to Ben to lead us through the inventory chapters progress update and the rest of that.
Yep, that sounds great. There's 3 items for this evening's agenda. Discussion of the inventory chapters, which I'll turn over to Sam in a moment to talk about. We had also handed out at the, I guess we kind of screen shared and followed up after the meeting with about 4 pages of preliminary highlights, kind of those headline bullets from the inventory chapter work so far. And I'd like to spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes tonight kind of getting a sense of the kind of work that we're going to be doing individually and together to kind of come up with what some of those high level, most important, most interesting, maybe most surprising findings from the inventory work might be. And then finally, this evening, and I think this is probably going to take most of this evening's conversation, is the preparation for the visioning workshop that we have scheduled for October 4th. We nailed down that date at last month's meeting, and we got that room space squared away. It's going to be in the room where you guys are in right now, and that will be an in-person workshop. So we're going to talk about the logistics for that, try and firm up the agenda, and talk about the goals and purpose of that meeting a little bit more when we get to that part of the agenda. Any questions on that before we jump right into it?
Sounds good.
Okay, so I will turn it over to Sam to talk a little bit about the inventory chapter progress, and we can have a discussion about where we are and what's next for the inventory chapters.
So I sent about 4 or 5 chapters out to Jesse yesterday, and I don't know if they've been distributed to committee members yet.
They
have, okay. So
I know that I haven't had a chance to review them.
we haven't all read them, but we all
Yeah.
received them.
okay, but you all have them. Okay, that's good. So that's yes. So anywhere it says comments from Jesse, those have been sent out and are obviously you guys said you have them, so you'll start to look at those. We're making pretty good progress with chapters. There's still a few that we haven't sent out yet, and those are the highlighted chapters that you're seeing on the screen. If you can see what Ben is sharing, I'm not sure.
See those.
Yes, so it's population, housing, fiscal capacity, and the existing land use chapters.
Do you want to talk about the process for reviewing these, Sam, that we firmed up with Brett and Jesse since the last meeting?
Yeah, so the process is that we are sending out a first round of chapters, preliminary round, and then we'll get comments back from Jesse and the town, and then we'll incorporate those comments and then send them back out, and then the committee will review them at that point. I think the goal with this is to not get in too much of a back and forth with people sending comments in bits and pieces, but to have a more formal approach. And I think we're trying to get a better sense of when we do make revisions of like projected timeframes and dates of when we want to send stuff out, so that Jesse can let committee members know when to start reviewing them.
So to maybe add on to that a little bit, I think the this column here is when the date of when we had a preliminary draft, kind of what we would consider a 50% draft that needed to get reviewed by the town, because sometimes Jesse, his staff members would find data that's incomplete, or kind of question the source of the data, or augment the things that we already had to make it more complete, more accurate. And when we get those comments back from the town and incorporate those into a first draft, which we kind of consider like an 80% draft, that's when we're sending it out to the committee to review those first draft plans. And like Sam had mentioned, we're really hoping that you have an opportunity to dig into these things. There's going to be plenty of time to review these. The idea here is that I fully expect some of you will be very interested in particular chapters. And I think that this column is an indication of what Brett had broken out. Is it true that you guys have kind of divided up the work a little bit so that individual committee members are more or less looking at specific chapters?
We've talked about this a couple different times, but I don't think
We didn't, or at least some of us did, and we responded. You should have some of those comments anyway.
So what we're aiming to do is compile all of the comments that we're getting from committee members. I kind of had guessed that some of you are going to want to go through every single chapter with a red pen, kind of line by line, and put comments in the margins and those kinds of things. But, you know, some people for some chapters may just want to skim them, or maybe you're not as interested in particular chapters. But the idea here is once the first drafts have been presented to the committee, and those are the ones that have been kind of had a first round of comments made and eyeballs put on them by folks at the town office, we're going to be taking all of the comments that come back from the committee through Brett and Jesse. So we're going to be hoping to get a wide range of comments over the next few months that we're going to be collecting and keeping in the project file, so that we can do a second round of updates in the spring, which is the normal, which not normal, but that's the schedule we'd outlined in the proposal. So we're going to get through some of the public participation work and then go back to the chapters with comments, so that we're going to be collecting all of the input and presenting them back to the committee as a second draft plan in the springtime. So we will be collecting your comments. We want you to dig into these things as much as you're able to, or much as you're interested to. But like Sam said, I think we set up this process so that we're not going to be doing a second draft next month and a third draft in December and so forth. We want to stay focused on the public outreach and some of the goals and policy work that we're now moving into. So you will be sending comments back, I'm sure. I don't want you to feel like they're just kind of going into outer space, but you won't see those incorporated into a draft until the springtime.
so. Ben, can you just clarify two things? One of which is there a deadline yet, or a date by which you want comments from the committee? And the other question is, should we send those comments to Brett or to you?
Our hope is that the comments would be going to Brett,
Okay.
so that we might be getting those, you know, we'll know to look for those emails from Brett. He might consolidate comments and, you know, maybe send a batch over and toward the end of the month, and then another batch in October, for example. Because we're hoping to be really focused on public participation in outreach work and starting to get into those goals and policies from now through about February. I think it would be absolutely fine to be taking comments on these chapters from now. We had talked here in the office, Sam and I, about getting comments through the end of the year. Our aim is to get these last 4 chapters over to Jesse by the end of the month. And as soon as we get comments back from Jesse, we are incorporating those and getting them out to the committee as soon as we can, so that, you know, my hope is we'll have a couple months of the full set of chapters to kind of go through them individually and get comments back through Brett.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. A couple questions from the committee, Larry.
Does that mean we could have a meeting and go over those in a group, or are we supposed to do it on our own? I'd like to have a group at least for some of it. I think.
Well, that's a fair point. I think our expectation at this point was we would be getting comments back from Brett. And if there were individuals or small groups in the committee who wanted to get together, I don't know that we would necessarily be using our monthly meeting time like this to kind of go through chapter by chapter, but I absolutely do see the value in kind of talking these things through a little bit more instead of just kind of flipping through them individually at your house.
Right. We can work that out as a group.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a useful, especially if they're subgroups.
Yeah.
Who want to get together and talk about marine
Because
resources.
then we
or-
don't have to post.
If it's a small enough group.
We have to be careful that we don't violate meeting laws. open
Small
meeting
enough
laws.
forum for that. Or if we do want to dedicate meeting time to it, maybe we decide on some third Thursday, maybe after Ben leaves, you know,
Yeah.
like we meet with Ben for the first chunk and then we have a
Yeah.
working session to
Yeah.
look through it in either our October or November meetings. Is the third Thursday in November Thanksgiving? Anyway.
Yeah, the next meeting, I think the regularly scheduled meeting would be October 20th. That was one of the things I wanted to just clarify with folks, kind of as the last item, that was still going to be
Right.
on people's calendars.
Are there other questions about inventory chapters and the review process? Yeah, Jessica.
So I know he had mentioned that, you know, a couple of you guys have already said what chapters in particular you were interested in, but I don't remember doing that work with these guys. We've done it previously,
At the very beginning, right.
and I don't remember doing that work. Is it kind of now all free for all and comments just go to Brett from here on out? Is that how you want to move forward? Is that our participation expectation?
Yeah, we were viewing that, and I will preface this by saying this is all open for discussion on how we actually end up doing this, but I think our intent was not to take up, you know, if each one of these chapters took an hour, it would take us about 13 meetings to get through all of those chapters as a group all together. So I do think that there's good sense in the approach of, you know, if there were 3 or 4 chapters that individuals were most interested in, those are the ones that they dive into. There could be a few chapters that the group says, you know, maybe it's the economy, maybe it's marine resources, and one other one that are really going to be the most critical to have the deepest level of data and the most understanding, the most facts kind of on the table. And maybe those identified chapters are the ones that get workshopped through with the committee a bit more. But I think our intent, and just based on the project schedule that was set out, was there wasn't going to be a lot of meeting time with everybody all together to kind of go through individual chapters.
Yeah.
I guess this super minor, but I've noticed when I was briefly viewing what was sent to us that we're seeing Chris Saunders' name come up with the comments. I'm assuming it's actually Jesse's and he just hasn't switched things over, but the name is coming up, Chris Saunders, and I just want to confirm that he is not the individual who's making the comments on this.
Yeah, we'll look into that. I don't know, Chris.
He was the previous town manager before Jesse.
Okay, yeah, it's likely that those
Actually,
are,
Jesse's phone message is still Chris Saunders too. He told me they don't know how to change it. I said it might be easier. He just changes his name to Chris Saunders. So maybe that would work here too.
I think that's Jesse who's making those. Yeah, I didn't know who Chris Saunders was. I saw it in one of the chapters though. Yeah.
So that's a good point. Maybe what we can do for the future chapters we send is make sure that they're a little more like clean copy instead of like showing some of the changes.
Yeah,
Russ, can we put it on our agenda next month, to talk about breaking up the groups and
I mean, yes, sure. Also, one of the things I'm hearing Ben suggest is sort of de-emphasizing the inventory review process and
Yeah.
saving our bandwidth and energy for public engagement, public participation. I think that's a little bit of a shift from our previous consultants' focus.
Right.
Also, I think it has to do with the fact, one of the things I'm observing, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, we're starting with this inventory process. The committee is sort of eager to get going. We want to,
Right.
and this is what's in front of us, but it's actually not the most useful
all right.
thing for us to be using our time with. Would you agree with that, Ben?
I think that's a great segue into the next part of the agenda. The inventory chapters are they look back. They're the facts. I've kind of explained it to folks as, you know, if you think about like the old newspaper logo, like just the facts. Like we want to get the analysis and the numbers and the data in these chapters. And the real plan, the part of the plan that looks forward and the part of the plan that sets goals and policies is where we're going next. We're entering that phase of work now. So the idea here is that we've got really solid preliminary drafts of all these chapters, and a good number of these are in the town office review process. So what we're hoping to do is end up with a set of information that we can present as part of the plan and as part of the public process that tells a story that says, you know, this is, you know, what we're dealing with right now. These are the most important things we need to consider when planning for the future. So we're not, with these inventory chapters, you know, we're not writing the history of Tremont as a town. We're not, you know, coming up with the economic development plan, but there are certain things that are in those state requirements that are meant to get at, you know, the heart of planning issues. And those are going to be different from community to community. So what I've put up on the screen here, and I can make this a little bigger for folks if you want, but this is a preview of, I guess, a review of what I'd sent out after the last meeting. And our hope here is that we can start a process, maybe go through a couple of these sections, knowing you don't have the full chapters in front of you necessarily, but kind of look at these bullet points. And ultimately what we'd like to do is get to a place where we can maybe take 8, 10, or 12 of these bullet points and tie them together so that you can see the relationship between these things. You know, historically, those inventory chapters have been very segmented, siloed, individual policy areas. And I think with this work, we're going to start to try and tie those together so that we end up telling a story about where Tremont is as a community today and what we need to consider planning for going forward. So I'd like to maybe turn it over to Sam to maybe pick a couple of these sections and we can kind of walk through some of the bullet points, just get some reactions from the committee about, you know, hey, that's a fine fact to know, but it's not really germane to what the future of the community is. Or maybe that is an interesting fact, but it's not, related to anything else that we need to be planning for. So I think what we want to do is kind of start this process as a group. Like you said earlier, I think it was Larry who said, we need to do some of these things together so that, as part of a subcommittee work or when you go back and look at these individually before the next meeting, you can do some of this on your own and kind of analyze which of these are most important to bring forward to the public and which are going to be happy living in the inventory chapters and not brought into the future looking part of the plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Sam, were there a couple that you wanted to walk through, or did you kind of want to just start at the top and lead a discussion with folks about, impressions, thoughts, around the most interesting, surprising, critical kind of things?
Well, I called out the ones that I felt were most relevant or said the most about Tremont in bold. And that was just trying to narrow down really key points and key trends. So I think just looking at the ones I've put in bold would be maybe good to go over if we don't want to go through each bullet. I think, I don't know if this has been revised since the last it was sent out, but I know the Marine Resources chapter, there was issues with data there. I did not have accurate data on number of, oh, I guess it has been updated. Yeah, I didn't have accurate data on number of licenses because I wasn't looking at Bernard, Seal Cove, West Tremont, all those other, the villages of Tremont. And so that chart has been updated, whereas before it was saying something like there's not a lot of marine licenses in Tremont being issued, something like that. So that was a key point that it looks like it's been updated.
Yep, that's a great example of the town making sense of data that didn't seem to make sense to us. I think in the current comp plan, the one that's being updated right now, the Marine Resources chapter said there were 60 some commercial fishing licenses in the town of Tremont. When we got the data pack from the state, it said there was one. And we put it in the inventory chapter and sent it to Jesse and said, this doesn't make a lot of sense to us. I mean, can you verify this for us, please? And he looked at it and said, this is not right. Let me get to the bottom of it. And came back just a couple days later, I guess, right, Sam, where he said, we haven't got a lot of commercial vessels who are applying for licenses fishing out of Tremont. They're all fishing out of Bass Harbor. They're fishing out of Seal Cove. So why don't you search on those? And then that was how they were found in the Marine Resources database. So if, that's the kind of level of like truth checking and updating and making sure that these first drafts are not going to be presenting something ridiculous to the committee or the community. We want to have, some level of accuracy that you can really make more meaningful comments on instead of getting hung up on like, obvious things that are not true and kind of calling the whole chapter into question, for example.
Can I make a comment on that particular issue? There's a disconnect between fishing licenses that may be issued in either the town of Tremont or one of the harbors and who the fishermen actually are, because a lot of them are driving down from Trenton and Lemoyne to fish here. So the impact on the harbor is not just from Bernard or Bass Harbor fishermen.
The licenses
Licenses
here,
are out of
you
there.
can go by how many moorings there are.
That's a better,
There's 70 moorings. That's not-
yeah.
But your license, if you lived in Trenton or Lemoyne, your license would be from Lemoyne.
Exactly.
No, you
No.
can't.
No, for
No, it
what
wouldn't.
Larry's saying, it'd be from where you're fishing out of.
Yes.
So if you fish out of Bass Harbor, no, go ahead, I'm sorry.
So you have to get a permit when you have a boat now, Bass Harbor,
Right.
and it's $1,000 or whatever it is. And so that's how you can tell how many people are fishing.
So-
they're getting a license for they're getting a permit to put the boat on the mooring and on the dock, they get the permit to park for their stern man.
Jessica?
Yeah, so in order for anyone to hold a license, they have to have a boat registered. And where that boat is registered in the harbor is how they get their license.
Right. So
They
they're
cannot
registered
have their
up here.
license unless they have a boat registered in that harbor.
So circling back to where the data came from, it's not just Tremont residents that have those licenses.
Right.
Right, and so I guess the question for Ben and Sam is, are you counting licenses as well as registrations?
No, just whatever it says, just marine licenses. Not, I don't think that includes registrations.
Yeah, and again, this is maybe a microcosm for the work is the Department of Marine Resources at the state licenses commercial fishermen. And they have data on that, and it is based on where the boat's registered. And I think we found an example, maybe this is from the current version of the plan, where it said, it noted that there's people from outside of the town of Tremont who have boats licensed in Tremont harbors. And I think there was an example of someone from Stockton Springs who had a Tremont-based license. But there's also town data that the harbor master keeps track of moorings. So it's trying to take data from different places and draw some conclusions and make a picture of what the actual situation is.
Yeah. I think what we want to know is how many people are using fishermen are using our dock and
Right.
in Bass Harbor and in Seal Cove.
Jessica, did you have a question or comment?
Mostly just about how to be more pragmatic, like can we start from the top again and go bullet by bullet, and if we're content with it, then we can go down. Because I feel like we can really get into dig down to these rabbit holes. I'd like to cover as much as we can with the time that we have, and starting from the top, working our way down, be the most efficient instead of just starting at middle ground.
Yeah, let's go back to the
And
top.
this is going to be the challenge, right? With any kind of group work that we do, we're all going to want to take it in different directions and dig into those interesting things. But my hope is in maybe the next 10 or 15 minutes, we can kind of walk through the first couple of these, so we can all kind of figure out together, ultimately, when we review these inventory chapters, we're each going to want to individually come up with these bullet points are Sam's. So you are going to agree with hopefully a bunch of these. You may think that some of them are less important, but when you go into the individual chapters, you may pull out some individual things that Sam didn't put on this list. So ultimately, this is what we're going to be building toward. And if we can walk through the first couple together, so we all have the common understanding what the task is going to be as we go through these chapters, I think that would be plenty for tonight.
That sounds great, Ben. Was it Peter who wanted to jump in?
Well, I have a question as to how it was determined that the Bass Harbor Memorial Library is at risk for sea flooding.
I wondered the same thing.
That's, I mean, I appreciate the concern, but I think that's way down the road.
It's That's just right before that I have waterfront where I
Well,
live.
I'm gonna be flooded out too, so I'm just curious where that data, where that came from.
Is a high point
It's
there on
probably
that
the high
peninsula,
point there,
yes.
yeah.
That was that came from the main weathering climate map. So they do climate maps of towns, and you can click on different layers showing projected sea level rise in 100-year, 500-year floodplain. So this is just very much into the future. but it shows historic properties and relation to sea level rise. So it's very much like you said, it's not necessarily in the next few years. It could be even like 10, 20 years down the line, but it's a tool that the state, a mapping tool that the state created.
Must be the fall one.
Jessica?
Yeah, if we could add the Tremont school to that, because it's already sinking. Our first grade classroom's already, has gone down significantly. And that's something that we're gonna continue to face.
And so that'll appear probably lower,
Yeah, I'll put that here.
The library's in it, that's a public
but it's not
facility.
historic.
There's no historic.
Archaeological.
Oh,
That's-
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, it's relevant and it should be somewhere in the comp plan. But
Yeah.
It's not a historic building.
Exactly. I'll put it here so we don't lose it, but that is probably gonna go in the public facilities chapter, but
perfect.
so Sam, you'd noted that there were 5 buildings listed on the National Register. I'm presuming that all of these structures were listed and that's how they got on that state mapping.
Yes.
Those others are at higher elevations or further away from the coast.
Yes,
Isn't
that's right.
isn't the red store also on the National Register in Bernard, and that's probably 40 feet lower than the library.
And Ruth Moore's house is also on the
Yeah.
National Register, and that's lower than probably
Yeah,
both of those buildings.
yeah,
Not that they are much risk for a century or two anyhow.
no. Well, I don't know.
Ruth Moore house.
I don't know where the Dick's, I don't know anything about
That's the-
Yeah, I don't know what, I don't know.
So historic and archaeological resources is not a chapter that's, going to see a lot of updates and changes because it's looking so far back. I think that some of these things are new in this plan, but a lot of the places, structures, just kind of a general history of the town are not changing a lot from the current version of the plan. You want to walk through some water resources, Sam?
Sure. So, yeah, the 3 that I called out are pertaining to water quality issues. We can just start going through the first,
Overboard
go through the
discharges?
first one, but
It's interesting in that too.
yeah,
Surprised you did not bold the 19 overboard discharges. And maybe that's not as big a deal as it seems like it is in my head.
So are those, they're licensed overboard discharges or?
Yeah,
Yes.
their grandpa.
I don't know enough about overboard discharges.
They treat it with chlorine and like a sand filter.
Is it bad for the marine ecosystem?
Better than it was.
Yeah, it's better than a
Yeah.
straight.
So we do not have the chapter up in front of us. Sam, do you happen to remember if that's changed since the last version of this plan that went out?
yeah, I know it's changed. I don't remember if it's what
It's
the
less,
number
right?
was before. Yeah.
It's less than it was.
I
I
think
think I heard someone say that these are known kind of grandfathered landside uses that discharge water to the harbor.
what you're missing here, are you done with that? I don't interrupt.
Go ahead.
One thing that's missing, I think that's important, is the contamination from our closed landfill. We have right here a bunch of, a triangle essentially of wells that are contaminated, people with water treatment systems, including here in this town office.
And we have heard about that. I'm not sure that's in the chapter. I know that Noel has brought that to our attention as like a known current issue.
It's been going on for a number of years, so it's certainly well documented.
Get money from the state.
Are they continuing?
I don't know if we still do, we did.
I think
I
they
don't believe
shut
we
it
do
off.
anymore.
Yeah.
You guys can't fix this, too bad.
You want to go through in one more?
Yeah.
I don't think a lot changed in this one either, right?
No, yeah, most of this is the same as it was.
And really, I think the data sources for this are primarily DEP state level mapping with some on the ground survey work. I think most of their, how would you characterize that, Sam?
Yeah, that's true. And some of it is also coming from beginning with habitat as well. And main natural areas program.
This is a chapter that's going to be somewhat map heavy. There's going to be maps showing wetlands and slopes and those kinds of things. One of the takeaways I had when I reviewed the natural resource chapter was related to coastal fishery habitat. So those ponds and primarily brooks and wetlands that had access to the salt water and what that means for fish rearing habitat and like salt or brook trout.
I think the other thing with this chapter is specifically with the wild brook trout. So the last bullet point, that's something that we would rely on local knowledge to confirm, because some stuff that came from the last chapter of, for instance, like bald eagle habitats in specific places. So that's something that, are the habitat areas still the same, or is there less? Has there been a sighting in another place that we didn't mark? So that's, I feel like this chapter is getting at some of that local knowledge on specific places that are called out in the chapter.
I think I would add alewives to the Seal Cove fishery.
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Particularly important.
Right.
And
This year.
the rebuilding of the fishway, which has just been completed.
Right.
That's it. Sam, I sent you, I reviewed this chapter and I sent you a bunch of information. Did you not get it, or?
No, I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Did that make it into the?
It made it into the chapter. It just didn't make it into the summary.
Okay, okay. Can I ask you a question? Where are you getting your wetland information and the maps for wetlands in Tremont here? Because it's a very important issue for some of us who deal with planning issues.
You want to answer that, Sam?
Hard to define.
Where we're getting wetland information from.
Yeah.
Where are you getting the map information?
Well, Suzanne is doing the
Yep.
maps, and she,
Yep. So Suzanne she works with Noel. I think you met her in April.
Yep.
100% state level and national wetland inventory level mapping. It's not based on actual on the ground wetland delineations. So it's very rough town level mapping as opposed to kind of site specific on the ground designations.
I'm just curious, you can't point me to a source because I've looked around for some information. It's kind of hard to find. In fact,
I think the national wetland has a delineation, has a mapping.
Right,
I think
and
that's the
it
closest.
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't show a lot of stuff. Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, there's a very good layer that DEP has made available in all of their state data packs, and it's based on National Wetland Inventory. It typically under reports the actual number and size of wetlands. There's another way to kind of get to it, which is hydric soil mapping, which is another statewide GIS data layer, I should say. And I think that soils mapping over reports. So the actual reality is sometimes in between. I think that the more conservative layer to use at a town scale again is what DEP uses in their beginning with habitat maps, which is the National Wetland Inventory mapping. But you can kind of maybe get a more interesting, maybe a little more detailed picture by looking at that with hydric soils, which are hydric soils are like the saturated soils, the poorly drained soils. So they're not looking again at the types of plants that grow there and those kinds of things. It's just more of a soils map with the wetlands map, and you kind of put them together. Might give you a more complete picture, but it's good for planning purposes. It's not going to be like what the planning board might rely on when you're looking to approve a project. You would want some person with wetlands delineation experience to go out and actually survey that particular site to verify.
Thank you.
So this is kind of the task, and I think you can see the process. When we have a complete chapter, we're reviewing it for, I keep kind of calling it the most interesting, the most critical, the most surprising headlines that we would want to bring forward. So I think that, there will be a conversation about what each of those would be for each chapter. And I think there's going to be 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5. There's no set number, there's no requirement. It's just really what we want to use to bring to the community to kind of kickstart these conversations around policy. So I will save this. Maybe I'll send out the updated version. This is kind of a next step, and you can kind of go through a version of this on your own or make your own version of it as you take a look at those inventory chapters as they start to roll out onto your computer screens. Any other questions or comments about that work?
Makes sense, thanks.
Yep. So the next item is where I think we're going to spend the bulk of the rest of our time tonight, thinking a little bit about the October 4th visioning workshop. This was something we discussed at the last meeting as a way to maybe reintroduce this effort to the broader community, to have people gather in a room and kind of talk with each other and talk with the committee members and the planning team about some of the things that make Tremont special and what their vision for the future is. So again, we nailed down October 4th, which is a Tuesday, and that's coming up in a few weeks, maybe 3+ weeks. So the idea here is that when we last talked about this, there were a couple considerations that would help shape the agenda for this and how we approach it. And I think our thoughts have changed actually since the agenda went out last Friday to folks. I think there were a couple reasons for this, but let me tell you where we left our conversation last month as the committee, and kind of maybe where we'll start the conversation tonight. At the last time we got together, we were thinking about this as a kind of a presentation to the community to say, you know, we've been looking at a lot of data, and here's what we think we've learned, and are we on the right track? What else do we need to know? What are your thoughts and reactions to this data? So we had a conversation with folks at the Musson Group as a planning team earlier in the week, thinking about how to manage this kind of first introduction. And we opened the meeting saying, you know, we're going to get together. We had this vision for like starting at 3 o'clock, maybe 4 o'clock in the afternoon and going until 7 or 8 at night. And we're going to have an open house with a lot of posters and maps and things for people to look at, some conversation starters, and then we'll have a presentation in the middle. And it started to feel pretty complicated. And it started to feel like maybe we should back up a step and just say, we're starting this comp plan, and we're going to have a sign when people walk in, say, this is what a comp plan is, and this is what it does. And rather than present things or tell people what we think is important to know, just kind of leave it more general and have a lot of questions, have a lot of prompts, and leave a lot of room for discussion around what people like best about living in Tremont. What do people love about Tremont? Where are the most scenic or iconic places to be in Tremont? And have these set up as stations around the room for people to interact with, write down on Post-it notes, to talk with each other, to talk with members of the committee who would be at each of these stations potentially. So I think that does a couple things. Number one is it avoids the confusion that we thought it might introduce if we said, come to this open house, but we're also going to do this presentation at 5:30, and drop by for as long as you want, but if you miss the thing at 5:30, then you're out of luck. And just kind of simplifying the format of the meeting. So it's, people want to come for 10 minutes and walk around the room once and put some sticky dots or Post-it notes on things and say hi to some friends and head home for dinner, they could do that. Or if people want to come for an hour and a half and engage more with members of the planning team or with the steering committee, they could do that as well. So we were kind of moving away from having someone on the planning team at the front of the room with a set of PowerPoint slides, giving a 40-minute presentation on comp plans and the town of Tremont, and having more of an idea that let's just have some open-ended questions and really build this more as like an open house as opposed to a presentation, where in that room you're in now, we might have 5 or 6 stations around the room and some space for people to gather in the middle around a couple tables with maps, and approach it as more of an open house. So come when you like, stay as long as you like. We'll be there from mid-afternoon all the way through early evening. So that's the first thing I wanted to check in with the committee on, to see if there were any thoughts or feelings around one approach or the other, with the goal of, the first option, the presentation would essentially be saying, here's what we know about planning and here's what we know about Tremont. What are your reactions to that? Versus, please come and tell us about this place, and we'll use that to build around the planning process.
Great. Thoughts and questions, Jessica?
Yeah, I will say, like, initially hearing what you have to say, I like the idea that we're going to get to interact, but the lack of structure, I have a serious concern about. There's a lot of hot ticket issues going on in Tremont right now, and I'm really concerned that's going to open it up us up to a set of a whole different level that we don't want to go to, and I don't think it will be productive unless it's more structured.
Right.
And-
Okay.
Actually, I think the second, what you just come up with is more consistent with what I had suggested last meeting, which was, there's a lot of people who are confused about the whole role of this committee.
Yeah.
And, you know, I get approached constantly saying, well, why can't you fix the issue of the, you know, whatever the planning board has before them? It doesn't work that way. And I think this approach is actually would be pretty helpful with that.
Can you clarify which this approach you're talking about?
Having some kind of a description as you walk in the door. This is what a comp plan is. This is how it works and why it's required, and you know, all that stuff.
I would rather see that be a presentation, because then we're expecting them to come in without having an agenda on their mind and then being like, hey, can you please read this before you enter? Because I think that's still going to open a lot of conversations that don't need to happen and won't be productive.
Other thoughts?
I don't think people are going to stay for all this time. So
No.
I am actually concerned about having a presentation, whether everybody's going to get to hear the presentation. I like the more open-ended, this is what a comprehensive plan is, and then have various tables set up for various issues.
And it may not be issues. I think it was, you know, is Jesse, right, who is concerned about a lack of structure.
Jessica.
Sorry about that.
Doesn't matter.
I agree that whatever we do needs to have structure. There needs to be order, and we need to have some framework for the conversations to take place. But I think that we could still, one of the things I want to get to next is, you know, what would appropriate questions be, and how do we handle, you know, how do we want to take concerns? I know that we talked about campgrounds, and that's still, I think, an ongoing thing. And I know that Noel has also talked about, you know, kind of the urgency of groundwater and water source issues in the community. I think the goal of this early visioning work would be less about maybe trying to de-emphasize specific issues or policies or goals, and more around things like having some maybe more celebratory, like, we're here because Tremont's a great town, and we want to make sure that in the future we're planning to keep it great. We want to ensure that the quality of life we know today will be preserved, and in some ways maybe even enhanced through some of this work. So I can give you some examples of questions that are that we've had good experience with, as far as people, you know, grabbing markers and writing things on posters, or using Post-it notes to put on the wall, around, you know, things that, you know, what do you love about your town? And that is a good introductory question to ask on a Post-it note, because people can write just a couple words or a sentence and put it up there, and other people can see those responses and kind of build on it. Other kind of questions are, you know, what's your big idea? If we could do one thing in Tremont, what would it be? And, you know, have some, like you said, some structure, ask these questions in different places, have some mapping activities where people can locate. This is one of the things that we noticed from the inventory work is scenic resources. There's not a real good list that we found so far that shows, you know, the view from this road looking east is fantastic, or the view from this point looking out toward the islands is iconic Tremont. This is what it means to be in Tremont. We could do those kinds of mapping activities. And I think that that would generate some discussion that we could then use to maybe address some of these maybe more thorny or hotter issues at some point later in the process. Does that make sense? At least theoretically.
It makes sense, but I think my perception is there's going to be a lot of disappointed people. There's several hot button issues in this town. Weekly rentals is big. The phone's been ringing off the hook upstairs at the town office about it. We had somebody come raise the issue at our planning board meeting the other night. And people, like what Pete says, they're not sure what the comprehensive plan does. And somebody called when I was in the office the other day. They wanted to know about the meeting where they're going to be talking about weekly rentals. And it turns out what they're talking about was this thing we had planned on the board. So there's that. And also the other big hot issue right now is law enforcement coverage. So
I guess
what I'm trying to say is I think people are going to show up expecting to be able to weigh in on some of these issues. And if we just give them, well, what do you like about Tremont? I don't think they'll be happy.
So
We already did that survey.
I think one of the questions should be, where do you live and who do you want to be your neighbor? I'm serious, it's a Mr. Rogers question, but it really gets to what people in this
They
town
liked everybody in the neighborhood, come on.
But it gets to what people in this town are concerned about.
Jessica?
I think would be most productive really is if we sat down as a committee, come up with a presentation, maybe a half an hour long saying, hey, this is what a comprehensive class plan is. This is what our jobs are as task force members.
Yep.
This is ways that we are trying to reach out to you, connect. And then like, not only do we need their feedback, but that's what the survey was for. And I really would caution us opening ourselves up to this open-ended, like, what do you like about Tremont? Because right now, a lot of people are really upset with Tremont. So instead, I'd like to just be more informative and include a part like, hey, this is how you can participate. Do you guys now have any questions? And then we open it up for a quick Q&A, half an hour at most. And then that way we're only committed to an hour, maybe an hour and a half of an evening, which I think would be more, I guess, better received. And it will allow everyone to feel comfortable enough to answer those questions. It's in a structured, controlled environment, as opposed to a, hey, well, I'm going to rip down your Post-it. You know, that's where we are in terms of even vandalism with signs and stuff. So I think there's a lot happening. And I think if it's not structured properly, we're not going to get what we want out of it or what we need out of it to be productive task force members.
What time are you going to people with young children?
I'm sorry, I missed that last point.
What time can we have it so that people with young children and seniors who don't drive after dark can come?
Yeah. Well, why don't we, I do want to talk a little bit more about what we need to get out of this, right?
Yeah.
And I think that will inform some of the questions we ask and how we ask it or interact with folks. We had made a presumption. Essentially, we're trying to do both these things. When we were thinking about this last week, even we were like, we're going to have an open house with plenty of time in the afternoon and plenty of time in the evening, and a presentation sometime in the middle. And what we were kind of keying in on was there was a comment at the last meeting about, you know, if there was a way to kind of time this so that people were in the room and this place was available when people were picking kids up from school or maybe on their way home from work, where they could maybe do a pop-in, that might be more realistic. So we had proposed 4 to 7 on the agenda as a starting point for the conversation tonight. I was wondering if that was early enough. Like, would that get us to that goal of, you know, potentially getting people at the school or coming from the school or on the way to the school?
What time is school pickup?
2:30, I think, approximately.
As a parent, the time frame that you suggested is after school activities. So especially on Tuesday, we got practice. A lot of the Tremont kids are involved. So most of us are running back and forth, and we are not getting home till dinner until 7:30. So that time frame eliminates a lot of the younger, but I question how much of that population is going to be concerned about the content. So what, I mean, we can sit there and hope that everyone's going to come, but I think in reality, I think we really have to see, not that we want to like necessarily target who we reach out to, but we also have to be like, okay, well, who's going to be interested? Who are we going to get?
Right.
And then cater it. And then also keep in mind our schedules too, because we're the volunteers who put in a lot of work already. So I think it should all be considered.
And also people's dinner time. People eat
Yeah.
early at Tremont.
This is in Spain.
Yeah.
It's not Barcelona.
So we had envisioned, as one possibility, if we're going to run this from 4 to 7 or 3 to 7:30 or whatever it is, I think we could have really good coverage from the planning team with me and another planner, probably Sam from North Star, there for the beginning, with Noel and Suzanne there for an overlap period and kind of being on the closing shift. So whenever we started or whenever we end it, we do have a lot of flexibility, and it's not just going to be volunteers in the room kind of blown in the wind or thrown to the wolves or whatever you want to say. And I do think it is a very valid concern. Like it's going to be important for members of the committee, probably Jesse, to be in the room for some portion of this. And as we think about, maybe more or less these self-service kind of tables or stations, it will be very valuable to have committee members there who can answer questions or kind of help walk people through, like, well, what do you mean? What are the biggest, opportunities, and you can, have a short conversation or give some instruction to people. Just being in the room, having the availability there. So I do want to kind of get a sense from folks if you're available for some portion of that day. And then, hopefully by the end of tonight, we can say, all right, 4 o'clock, no one's going to show up before 5:30. So let's just do this from 5:30 to 9, or let's just have it open as much as we can. We'll go from 3 to 7:30 or 8.
Yeah. I think it's better to favor the early part. Nobody's going to want to come out and stay out till 9 o'clock.
In terms of coverage, I know there's one person who won't be here on the 4th.
Me.
That's you, right? Are the rest of us able to be here for an hour or two?
Yeah, as far as I know,
I can be
yeah,
here
I shouldn't
for a
have a
little
problem.
Jessica can't.
No.
Yeah.
You'll be juggling.
Chemo. Chemo.
Awesome.
My father has a chemo appointment that day, and depending on the structure, I probably wouldn't want to participate anyway.
You can be here, that it comes up. I think Brett can be, although.
We need to excuse for that.
You get that.
Oh, right.
Where you go?
Yeah. So I think we've got 6 or 7 of us who can be here for a couple hours of that day.
Yeah.
He doesn't need a third, he's gonna stay and eat one.
And I'm fine with that level of understanding at this point. I think as we get closer, we could, try and make sure that we've got at least a couple people from the committee in the room pretty much anytime. And if others are around, that'd be great. But I am, thinking that kind of getting back to the time, was there a consensus in the room around a 3 o'clock or a 4 o'clock start? It sounds like in general,
7
earlier is
seems-
better. We don't need to go till like 9 o'clock with this, it sounds like.
I think stick with 4 to 7.
Yeah, 3 might be too early. A lot of people get off work at 3:30 around here, the construction workers and that sort of thing, 3:30. Lobstermen usually get in when late afternoon or mid-afternoon,
I'm not a parent of a school-aged kid, but it's hard to know, like, it's hard to imagine people picking up their kids at school and then coming here afterwards.
Right.
That's
Seems unlikely.
No, I think once we get our kids, we're like, all right, what's next? What's happening next? And a lot of times pickup isn't until later if they are doing garden club, that goes until 4:30.
Okay.
Like there's a lot of activities at the school and stuff.
So let's do, I think 4 to 7 seems like a good.
Okay,
Good time slot.
all right, that sounds good.
Ben, can you circle back to what a couple of people talked about your strategies for how do you engage people thinking aspirationally and optimistically, especially for people who walk into the room with concerns and fears? How do you hear those concerns and fears, acknowledge them and record them because that's important, but then also engage them in a more aspirational thinking?
Yes, I think there's a couple considerations to keep in mind. If we're going to go forward with this kind of structured open house concept, I think we're going to be very specific about the questions that we're asking and we want people to react to. And I think as part of that, there needs to be 1 or 2 of those that will leave room for a question like, understanding that the comprehensive plan needs to address a broad range of topics. Is there something that Tremont needs to absolutely proactively address in this for this effort to be considered a success? And there's, we can more concisely frame that, but I think that, if we don't talk about weekly rentals, what are we doing here? Are there issues like that? And giving people a chance to put those out there. I don't need to, in this format, we're not going to get into the pros and cons of weekly rentals, and we're not going to get into this strategy of dealing with weekly rentals versus this strategy, or the people who do weekly rentals are good and those who live next to them are bad kind of thing. It's just more like, what are the topics we need to address? And that's one way to ask a question where you can provide that outlet. If people are showing up with an issue, to that earlier point, we want to make sure we get that. But we also don't want to give the impression that we're here on October 4th to solve the groundwater problem, or we're here to solve the campground issue. It's more of getting these things on the table to see how they interrelate with each other so that we can set up a good conversation going forward about how to prioritize and how to approach some of these big long-term issues that the community is facing.
Yeah, Larry?
Ben, are you going to be running the meeting or one of us, or the chair of the?
Yeah, I will absolutely be there. I think that.
I think there's going to be somebody here to, if we get off to the tangent that Jessica's worried about, that somebody could bring us back in.
Yeah, I think that I can think a little bit more about how we might want to introduce a like maybe some ground rules, or how to just kind of remind people, hey, thanks for coming, sign in, grab a cookie, and this is what we're here to do, kind of thing. Like almost like a welcome station or an orientation station when people come in, so that they have an opportunity to be heard, but also understand the purpose of the meeting and how that fits into the context of the overall effort, which is going to be ongoing.
One of the things that's attractive to me about the open house is that it's a series of small conversations as opposed to one big one.
Mhm.
And to me, that feels like it's a much better venue to have. It means we might have to have the same conversation over and over and over again about weekly rentals or the role of the comp plan. But it diminishes the grandstanding and the
Mhm.
sort of, I don't know,
Tension.
the tension of trying to public speak, which can be a sort of a stressful thing, and it's much more conversational, where Ben might be having one conversation with somebody while Mark's over having a similar conversation with somebody else. And I'm serving somebody a cookie and asking them to sign in.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. if we were to say, come for this 1 hour session, where the guy from Southern Maine is going to have the microphone the whole time, there's going to be an urge, some tension for people to make sure they're heard. And if only one person is talking at a time and you've only got 1 hour to do that, people can start to elbow, for the microphone kind of thing. And I have been in those situations where, people have, more than, they want to make a statement as opposed to just provide some input. So I do agree with that statement, Lawson. I think the other thing is, if Sam is available, I'm available, Suzanne and Noel are also available, we can be people you can refer people to. So if you get into a conversation that starts to turn more into a debate or an argument, you can say, you know what, it sounds like you got, some more detailed info to provide. Why don't you go talk to Ben? And you can kind of maybe use that as a pressure release valve, safety valve kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I am becoming like more sensitive to some of the concerns and the need for some structure, and we'll definitely give more thought to that. So I think as we develop the program for this and some of the questions, I think we've got some of those standard kind of things that we would want to ask any community as they embark on this process, or like now that we've been at it for a while, or you've been at it for a while as a committee, how do you maybe re-engage with folks or the broader community? What are people around this table most curious about when it comes to how other people in the community think of the future of Tremont? Do you have ideas for questions?
I think one thing that I don't think, it's sort of impractical to do anything about it immediately, but thinking in the long term, I think that one thing to me that's missing in the town of Tremont is a town center. And I'd love to hear what other people think about that. And is there something, are there things that we can do to kind of skew us toward creating that? Not for this generation, but for my grandchildren.
A downtown, like we've mentioned before, yeah.
It's not the first time this was brought up.
I know,
Yeah.
and we don't seem to have a plan to do anything about it if people want to do it.
I think it was decided to do more of the corridor. Have businesses on the main road.
Yeah.
And not have the Tremont School is somewhat that.
I mean, we only have one selectman here tonight, so let me ask you, you might know about this. It's my understanding that Chris Saunders started developing an economic development plan of some kind, and Jesse has continued that to some point. And I don't know anything about it other than that. Does it somehow play into what we're talking about here in the comprehensive plan? Is this all useful information, and should we have it?
I don't think it got developed enough to really have.
It's an undeveloped plan, the development
I think
plan.
so, yeah, exactly.
Gotcha.
No, I think it's a great idea. I think everyone's talking about that.
So I think one of the questions, that we were considering developing a little more as it relates to the example you brought up was, where do you find community in Tremont?
Mm-hmm.
Where, and it's really trying to get to where do
Or maybe a
people,
church, if you belong to a church, yeah.
yeah, where do people gather? Where do you see neighbors?
Kansas. Yep.
Yep.
That's
Or God's.
Or Gott's, but Gott's is in Southwest, so. Yeah, it's true. There isn't really a place like that.
That's right.
There's no
Used to
park
be
you
more-
gather in. I mean, we do have like a hiking trail and stuff. but
And still cool.
There's a library, but
I see my neighbor.
I go southwest.
Yeah, I mean, is that kind of question?
Fixed our library.
I get
You know, I don't want to say, we're not gonna ask, yes or no questions or those kinds of things. Are you in favor of developing a town center? I think it's more like, just where do you find that today? Where do you feel like you're part of a neighborhood or a community? And those, in some communities, it's like parks and open spaces or a library or some places like that. But, is that kind of question gonna be interesting, you think, in Tremont?
Yeah, I think that would be good.
Yeah,
Another question that I have is around like regulation versus preservation. And I'm not quite sure how to turn that into a question yet, but like one of the things that I feel identifies us as people from Tremont is that like we don't have a lot of regulation here, and that there's some pride to that. But also there's some tension that comes from that in terms of development and growth. And I'm not quite sure what the question around that is, but something about how do you feel about.
A way to deal with that might be something like pick a zone that you thought would be a good town center, an area, and rezone it. And try to make it commercially developed rather than residential, start a new residential construction possibly.
Yeah.
Something, I don't know how that would be swallowed by people that, how they feel about it in that area, but.
It makes me think of the kind of question of, what are the parts of the community that you want to see change very little or be the same in 20 years as they are today? And
Yep.
What are the parts of the community that, could be better or maybe benefit from some investment or some change? It doesn't get directly to, regulation, or if it's public investment or whatever it is. It's just often that's done with maps. So you can have a map and have people look at it, show us the places that, when your kids come to visit 30 years from now, it's going to be very recognizable, that it's going to change very little from today. And where are the places that, would maybe have more change or benefit from investment, or word it in a way that would kind of insinuate like these are the places that would change, whether it's development or infrastructure or whatever it is, and just kind of leave that open-ended, not characterize it as, the commercial versus residential or public versus private, but just let people kind of fill in the blanks and say what it means to them.
is there a way to put something in that question that relates to the people that's coming to NDI, slowly coming over this way? That's an issue.
Or tourists, you mean? Or
Tourists, yes. And vacationers. Do rentals. That's a controversial. That's the whole key to what the future is going to be like. How many more people are going to come over here, and it's not going to be the quiet side.
Is that
somebody marketed that term back 20 years ago.
is it useful to look at that through like an economic development, or from a traffic and sense of busyness standpoint?
Sense of busyness, it just means more people over here. More people.
And I also think it plays into us staying a year-round community or not. I mean, with the advent of all the Airbnbs, and now that we have corporations and, buying multiple houses and that sort of thing,
You could say year-round working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, okay. I mean, it's something against people who are retired.
No, I mean, people who,
No, I know too.
All right. making notes to, I think we're kind of envisioning maybe 5 or 6 or maybe 7 stations where people could kind of walk in and sign in and get oriented. I'm wondering the best way, if we have like some PowerPoint slides or posters that are on a loop or something that to say, what is a comp plan? What is this committee doing? Like, if that is enough, or if it needs to be like every 20 minutes or so, someone says, hey, I'm Ben from the planning team, or I'm Lawson from the committee, and I'm here to welcome you and remind you of, what we're doing here. And, please stay as long as you want and talk with everybody you can. I don't know, like logistically, like how, I got to think about it a little more, I think, with folks about adding that like framework or that structure that'll help, keep it productive and positive.
Yeah.
I like the welcome table, sign in and get oriented. And having talking points there so that either a consultant or a committee member can orient them with what I'm hoping is just a half dozen somewhat simple bullet points about what the comp plan is and what the goal is today. And if that might happen one-on-one, or if 10 people show up all at once, which won't happen. If 3 people show up at once, then you gather those people and you do that informally.
I can picture that conversation happening while people are getting a name tag and signing in. And that will work if people comes and if they show up in like 1s and 2s over the course of time, I think that would be an appropriate way to do it. I think people are coming in by 5s and 6s, and there's a constant stream of people coming and going. Like that would be tough to do at an orientation table. And then you probably want something a little more like structured at that point. But my sense is it's probably going to be, a few people throughout the day. You might have 5 people in the room at any given time, but over the course of the whole day, maybe, 40, 50, 60 people show up.
That would be
If
amazing.
we're lucky.
That would be amazing.
Yeah.
That would be a success.
I think one thing that might be important to do is provide some kind of information on how they can continue to participate in this instead of walking in at one meeting and all that. That's what's going to make it work better, to get more into that.
Yeah, on the future.
Yeah, and this is the beginning of it. We're going to be meeting regularly. You can participate this way. You can just give them some options,
Come to the meeting.
because there are some topics that are going to be focused on more than others. But I think if people actually realize that part of the process, they're going to calm down some, which typically happens. And, say, we don't want you to just come in and vent, continue to work with us. This is the town's comprehensive plan. This isn't something we're ramming down your throat. Be part of the process, kind of thing. And I don't know how you put that message out there and give them continued opportunities to participate. But that's what's going to make it work, if it works that way.
Right. This is not your only shot to have input in the community for the next 10 years.
I hear people complain about the zoning or, the land use ordinance for the town. And they keep complaining because it's our land use ordinance. They don't seem to understand they voted on it and approved it. It's not, in the comp plan, it's the same thing. And I think if people can understand that, they'd be more willing to participate in it and do something constructive with it rather than, just complaining. I think that's one of the things they need to understand.
Well, I think that's good. This gives us a bunch of things to work on as far as the actual event itself. Are there other things? I'm going to bring up a preliminary, like we mocked up a sign that is meant to be hung up at the town office and the library and hopefully in the school. Maybe it could be shared on the town's Facebook page or gone out in like a parent newsletter through the schools. Let me do this. All right. Folks got that? So it's we're going to update this with, you know, the times, but we want to give people a sense of the purpose of this. You know, why are you showing up, and what is your job when you show up? There's only so much of that you're going to be able to put on a sign or on a Facebook post, but I think we're going to want to start, you know, building awareness of this in the community. Sounds like there's already some awareness of this in the community, but giving people a sense of how this is going to work and how they can participate.
I have a question. At the end, it says a short video of the event and an online survey will be posted to the website. What's that about?
That is a remnant of the idea we had about making this at least a portion of it, maybe a 30-minute presentation. We were going to record that portion of the presentation so that there's an online component to this as well. And we had a conversation earlier in the day about how we, you know, some of these questions that we discussed, you know, what's your big idea? What do you love about Tremont? Where are the places we want to protect from the impacts of change, and where are the places we want to encourage change? Whatever those questions end up being, how do we have an online version of that where we could either on the town website itself, or maybe a link to an online survey tool that would ask, you know, if we're going to have 5 questions or 7 questions that we want people to respond to in person at this open house, how do we translate that to the internet? So people who can't or don't want to show up to this event in person have an opportunity to answer some of these same questions, and we can kind of merge the in-person data with the online data to get a more complete set of responses. I think if there's not going to be a presentation, we wouldn't have a video of a presentation, but I think it might be possible to set up like a 2-minute video of, hey, this is the next step in the public participation process for this plan update, and we are moving into some visioning and values kind of questions about what's important, what does it mean to be part of this community, and what is the future going to look like. And there's 5 questions below. Please take some time and answer them. And when you submit them, you can enter your email address to stay in touch. There's a short video like that.
So you would record something probably or possibly at the open house itself to post later. So let me suggest adding after to the website something following the open house or after the open house or something. It's a little confusing. You might think that it's going to be there before or during the open house. If we're going to get through. You understand what I'm saying? Maybe I'm just being a little picky, but.
So
Why update, say 2030?
I'm sorry, what was that?
In the title, it said update 2030.
Oh, yeah, still a draft. Some towns will have a like a brand or a logo or a name of the planning effort. I'm not aware of anything like that for Tremont, so we'll probably just call it comprehensive plan update.
Is it possible to do basically what you have there, maybe reformat a little bit and send it out in mailings in like a bulk mailing format to everybody in the town?
Good
We're gonna have.
question. That's not part of our scope to do the mailing, but I know that in some communities, they've done that. It might be, and it might even be as we get further in the process. Sometimes they'll send things out with like a monthly community newsletter, or when the property tax mailing goes out or something like that, they'll include things about the comp plan in those.
Yeah, well, we don't have that going on, but like a save the date card or something that we could do as a mailing out to everybody.
I'll talk with Jesse about that.
Town office could make that happen.
You think they could in this process?
We've done it. Well, there's that too.
Right.
I think they could do it.
The other thing on your poster too, if you're having people signing in at the door, I dump the last 3 words, yes, no registration required.
Yeah.
Because it
Okay.
feels like you just sort of put your name down on a piece of paper when you walk in.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess one question, Ben, in thinking about Mark's suggestion about a mailing, this is obviously like not the last moment for public participation. I'm wondering, maybe there's no limit to how much we should mail. Well, do you picture another bigger, better session where we do more publicity and
Get people interested now.
or should we like connotate it as hard as possible the next 2 weeks?
In the scope, what we had committed to in the original project proposal was a big effort in the February-March timeline to have a future land use workshop with the community, where we would be taking a draft vision statement and trying to present to the community what that means on a map. So if the value is preserve access to the water and encourage economic development in along the main roads, or encourage economic development. One way to do that would be show a map showing here's economic development along the main roads. Here's another future land use scenario that shows economic development in the built up villages, areas of the community. And have 3 different maps, plausible, realistic future conditions for the town that all to one degree or another match up with the values and visions of the community based on the survey that's already been done. And frankly, based on other work that we've got in progress, and let people react to that. So that was going to be kind of the big cornerstone of the public participation process. And right before the last meeting in August, Brett and Jesse said at a coordination meeting, hey, you know what, Ben, we know that you haven't scoped out a workshop this fall, but it's going to be important, we feel, to have some kind of outreach before all of the summer people have completely gone away. And I said, well, is it too late to do something like that between Labor Day and Columbus Day or Indigenous Peoples Day? And they said, no, as long as we do it before the middle of October, that would meet our purpose of, having an in-person opportunity while we still have a lot of people around before the snowbirds head south, kind of thing. So we've added this in. It is, we talked about it last month. So this is not, I would not consider this like a last minute thing, but it's definitely an extra thing that we've built into the project. So this is going to be really good, and it's going to give us some of the more foundational values and visioning things that we can use to build the future land use workshop on, which was going to be kind of the cornerstone of the process. Now it's kind of sharing the stage with this event.
That helps, but it,
I was just gonna say, does that get you?
yes, we should advertise.
Yeah, we gotta advertise it, but how?
So what if we tried to do, asked if we could do a mailing? Asked if they could do a mailing. Press release.
Yeah,
Facebook.
Facebook and the website.
The town website.
Town
and
website.
the town is- The thing about the town website though, is when you post something, it keeps moving down, and so it's not always there. And it'd be nice if there was like some space for just comprehensive plan stuff.
It could be on our page, but that's pretty deep. Did you raise your hand? I thought you raised your hand, but, okay. And the other thing is like inviting our friends, I think is the other useful tool.
We put some posters too.
Posters at Hampton,
Posters.
the library, the post offices, all three post offices.
Yeah.
One at Gott's store, because a lot of people here stop at Gott's store.
Yeah,
I'm less of an advocate for mailings, because I'm afraid, if you look in the trash bin in the post office with all these political flyers going out, they're full of political flyers and you might get equated with that.
Well, it might, but if you can look at somebody and say, we sent you a postcard.
True.
Then
How
they
come,
know.
how come I didn't know about this? Well, you did get a
You
postcard.
got a postcard, everybody in town got a postcard.
There is a lot of interest, and because of some of these hot button issues,
Yeah.
and we've been guided, at least I.
And I think that the language that Ben put together would be really useful to help us clarify when people show to our meeting.
what we have to know is who's gonna do what, so it doesn't get
Right.
done.
Do you raise your hand?
I did. I was just thinking, can you rent a sign like your speed limit signs, which
You put on the sign down here,
Down
yeah,
here,
yeah.
We'll
where
add it to
everyone
the,
sees it by the.
yeah, we got one right down there. That's
Down
great.
there, yeah.
Message sign.
Yeah.
Slow down, school's in session.
The one where they added the OY.
They
Did you
sure
notice
did.
that?
They did.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you for editing that.
Will Lawson mentioned it.
Who's gonna go to the town office?
If
Sorry, let's just do one conversation at a time so Ben and I can hear. You said that?
She had asked a question about what the school would do, and if Jessie just hands a flyer to Mrs. True, who's the principal, she can put it in the Wildcat Weekly. And that's what we get every week,
Oh, yeah,
with a
yeah,
bunch of
that's a good
kids,
idea, yeah.
pictures.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Right.
Well, they've got it.
So I think that Ben is gonna write, like, do the copy, and that'll be like the 8.5 by 11 poster. And then will Jessica include this in the minutes?
Yeah, yeah.
This, and then we get, and I'll follow up with Jesse tomorrow about town stuff. Will you write a press release? What, I mean, will
I
you?
was just gonna say,
You don't
I
have to-
heard the press release words.
I mean,
And I
you're
was
wearing
a
the
little
sweatshirt.
worried.
You're wearing the sweatshirt. So if you show up.
The sweatshirt is from the high school.
Oh.
It's not from the
All
newspaper.
right, all right,
Okay,
all right, fair enough.
I could do that
You don't have to
if I
say
get
yes.
enough
I'm just asking.
information to do something with.
Okay.
And right now, I don't have enough.
But
Other
if you
than
had,
time.
if you had the full copy of it, the
Of
text,
that, of what he, that,
yeah,
to me, that's
That's
not
not enough.
enough. I want to know what's at the state, what stations we're gonna have and things like that. I mean,
do you think that if you had a conversation with Ben, you would get enough information? I don't want to add too much work to your plate, but.
I can ask questions, whether Ben has the answers or not, it's up to him.
You can't have a press release, you can't have people on page. can you? It's just a-
So I can still hear you. Your video's off in the room, but we can keep the
Yeah, I
conversation
don't know
going.
why that turned off. Let's see if I can.
Edit it too, so they can run what they want. They can.
So I think what I'd like to do is kind of toward the end of the week, early next week, make sure that there it is, thanks. Get some more of these details drafted up, as far as suggested questions, as, kind of nailing down those hours, and just have members of this committee say, yes, this is what we discussed, or we discussed it and now we need to start to solidify some of these things. But I feel like we're on the right track, and I do like the ideas around how to help publicize, raise awareness of this thing. That's critical to the overall process, is giving people an opportunity to participate either in person or online, depending on how they want to do that. So is there anything else? I think I had like some questions about, because it's going to be right at dinner time, as folks said, should we have like some water and coffee and maybe some snacks kind of stuff?
We had talked when we were going to have a meeting before with our previous consultant, we were going to have pizza there.
Let's go
And,
get pizza.
I think.
People aren't gonna be here that long.
No.
yeah.
But how about cookies and
Yep.
water, lemonade?
Yep, and crackers or something.
Yeah, just
I will volunteer to go ahead and provide all that stuff since I won't be there. Actually, I won't have time to actually be there, but I can go ahead and coordinate that. I know Gotts and Hanson's are great about donating things. So we're not looking at coming from any type of budget. If we do have a budget, still, I don't know where that stands and how we navigate our expenses. But I think that's definitely something I can go ahead and navigate for
awesome.
light little refreshments.
Nothing much. But
No.
I think that would be fantastic. Thank you for offering that up. I've been to meetings. I love meetings with pizza. Sam knows I love pizza. It's a big like question mark if you order like 30 pizzas and 20 people show up, or if you order, this is even worse when you order like 10 pizzas and 100 people show up. I like to try and get like some RSVPs, just try and get an indication of how many people might show up before like doing something more substantial that way. But I think the kind of things you talked about, Jessica, just cookies, brownies, crackers, I'm sure the town office or maybe the school has a big coffee maker kind of thing. We could do something like that. And that's pretty flexible,
I just want to make sure, going back to the press release briefly, you want me to do a press release?
Yes.
Okay. I could just do it with time, date, and the general information, like basically on his card, we'll get in as a brief, or I could do it with more detail so tell me what you guys think is.
And keep it brief.
I think
People,
we're brief,
get people to put it on their calendar.
Okay, so
I think
basically where it shows.
and then we'll do an article, a
Yes.
bigger thing for the February event or.
Well, it would be nice if the paper's reporter that covers Tremont would actually do something
Correct.
like some reporters that used to cover.
I was gonna say too, instead of like a big press release or any extra pressure, we can go ahead and send that flyer to the island and be like, hey, can you please just put this and post it in there? And that takes any type of confusion. And I definitely would include refreshments on there, because that might be.
Yeah. Light refreshments.
Yes, light, yeah.
I'm sorry, folks,
Don't
no
come
pizza, no
hungry,
pizza.
yeah. Don't come hungry.
Potato chips and 4 ounces of water.
If you want beer, bring your own.
Yeah,
Jeez.
There is an electronic bulletin board in town too, that could put a message on it if they can be committed.
That's what we were talking about. Or the school one too.
School too, yeah.
Yeah,
I can talk to Mrs. True about
yeah, I was
that.
gonna say, you might be able to get some of the younger people there because they would tend to see that.
Yeah.
Totally.
There will be one at the end of the driveway at some point.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
been
it's
approved.
not there yet.
No, it's not.
Sam, does this kind of cover this? I think we've hit a lot of the logistical and program related things that I had on my list to cover. Is there anything that we need more details on or anything I might have missed totally?
When the get up, will we make sure they get out there? Will Jesse do that, or should one of us?
I'll ask Jesse, and if he needs help, then we'll reach out to the committee and ask for volunteers. At this point, let's leave that in.
I could do on that side, that end.
Right. Other questions about logistics for the October 4th event?
No, but if it's the 4th, we've got the paper of the 21st and 28th coming out, so So you guys have a preference of trying to hit
I would
something?
aim for the 28th. I don't think this is, I mean, like, we want it on people's calendars, but I don't think it's like a,
Especially, I concur with that view, Lawson, especially if it, someone's maybe gonna stop by for 10 or 15 minutes. It's not necessarily something you need to schedule an evening around. Some people will be there for an hour, but some people are gonna cruise around the room and say, thanks for the cookie, and probably hit the road.
Frankly, I think word of mouth is going to get people here more than any other way to happen.
I'd like to have something online so we can tell people. That
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
online
Yeah.
and you see
Well,
it.
I'll do the blurb and so they can post it up like I did for the one we didn't have.
Because some people are.
Yeah, I'll do that for the town website.
Ben, thank you for all the legwork thinking this through. I think the open house structure makes sense, even though our camera keeps turning off, but.
I think the last thing on the agenda was just confirming the October 20th date as the next regular meeting.
Yeah, so that's our next date, and Larry had mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, saving some time to talk about inventory chapters.
Yeah, I'm trying to back off.
Okay, all right.
He wants to go home and eat.
That's his point. Yeah.
Then, go ahead,
Just to that point, I do think it would be beneficial if we did meet. So maybe if people are interested in meeting, we just kind of reach out to Brett and then he can pick and choose some volunteers and be like, hey, I'm sorry, there's only 2 people that can meet about this. Who really wants it more than the others?
Maybe we
Because there
can
is
put
a
it on the
benefit.
agenda and just do what we want then.
Sure,
Yeah.
we'll sort of, like,
Maybe at the end of the agenda.
at the end of the agenda, we'll include a section about like discussion, open discussion about inventory chapters.
Yeah.
That sounds best to me.
Okay.
Yeah, that way we're not
Okay.
worried.
Yeah.
And if that lasts 10 minutes, great. If it lasts 2 hours,
Do it at the end of the agenda.
head will roll.
Participation will go down.
Then, yeah, great. So next meeting, third Thursday, October 20th at 5:30.
Do we need to excuse Brett Sapp?
And right before we adjourn, we should.
I move that we excuse Brett Sapp tonight.
Second,
Thanks. Second, great. All in favor?
I actually got a text.
And can you put in the record that I'm going to miss that meeting too? The 20th.
We're gonna preemptively excuse
Thank you.
Peter from the October 20th meeting.
Along with Jake.
and how about Mackenzie?
I've
Did she let us know?
been trying to say, I got a text from her, she couldn't make the meeting.
Okay, was she fighting the fire?
Okay, I
Is there a
move
neighbor?
Not that I'm
we
aware of.
Mackenzie come to
Great. Motion to excuse Mackenzie.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to excuse Mackenzie too.
Well, there's already a motion. so you
Oh,
would have a
second that.
Great, thank you. All in favor?
I
Thank
I,
you. All right, and then do we just get a motion to the October 20th meeting?
move we meet on October 20th
I'm in place.
at 5:30 PM in this room.
Great, thank you.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Who was this? Was it Mark? Sykes?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's Mark.
sorry.
Yep. Thank you. Any other business? All right, motion to adjourn.
Look, yeah.
Jay,
Jane,
you're on a roll.
come on, Jane. Second.
Motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody. Have a good night.